Hey, well, I guess this video, a lot of people complained about my sped up videos. I only speed them up if I'm going over an hour, thinking there's an hour time limit. Um, this, I guess, is going to be my discussion about vegetarianism and meat and demarcations, delimiting. Approach things, I think, significantly different than Conference Report approaches them, or Gary, or anybody else, as far as I can tell. I kind of wanted to, I guess, just start, just kind of jump in with a few ideas about this. Kind of okay, personally, I've been vegetarian, right, without cheating, and but meaning I've gone ahead and been vegetarian and enjoyed, milk and cheese and honey and all the things that define vegetarianism but don't define veganism, and I've been that way. I don't know, several years of my adult life, I guess, and partially started that idea with the idea of I considered the personal health aspects. A lot of people said it's just more healthy to be vegetarian. Other people said it's bad to consume meat on the body. Kind of went with the idea, against the paradigm of our carnivorous nature due to having fangs. Um, and then I meandered back into meat eating at some point. A lot of it has to do with social groups. I think who it is I'm hanging out with and such. And okay, and so but then I got caught up in veganism, and veganism was based strictly on an adherence to an ideal of animal identification and the same idealism that Gary puts forth in terms of the reduction of suffering of animals. I like to draw empathies, try to get out of speciation in my arguments, um, trying to, deny the limits of our human capacity relative to considering animalia, and I consider it, one must make irrational leaps of identification. They must, in order to empathize with a dog, one is either stripping down through destructive or deconstructive processes elements of their own language faculty through yogas or through different physiological abuses, smoking, drinking, um, meditations, things that are to strip away language, to strip away your faculty in some respect in order to identify or to negate, to short circuit one's thinking processes through a process of negation. And some people say, oh, well, negation requires rationality. Well, by negation, I also mean a movement against, not necessarily a logical opposite. And so, one might acquire this through meditation, through multiple attempts at clearing the mind and stopping the voice or the way in which words, I'll say it was the destruction of the internal monologue, which for me, I mean, you'll have to trust me on it based on testimony. I lost my internal monologue about a decade ago, and now my interaction with words is basically kind of they free float in combinations. I don't I don't pre-hear the words in my mind before I speak them. Meaning, when I had a internal monologue, there was a concomitant, coincidental relationship between words and the saying them, but the pre-rehearsal. And this was kind of a belt of rationality. Now that's just one angle that I want to represent in terms of trying to negate one, such that one is left with an interaction. I guess the interaction with animals has been the same. Kind of seeing a mirror in another animal is not dissimilar to seeing a mirror in other people, but I bring up the idea of knowledges, that humans share knowledges via language. So we're sharing a common language, but when you're sharing instantiations, notions of soul possession, if you will, just reflection of another, the notion of empathy, the notion of sympathy, the notion of cosmic connectedness, if you will. All these seem to come through in terms of my relationship with animals, and I've had pets. I've loved animals, and I've been vegetarian during that time, vegan during that time, and omnivore, carnivore, omnivore during those times. I've even gone so far as to get on the Atkins diet, a full animal consumption for short periods of time, and that was based on a notion that overweight people were able to lose weight on a certain amount of consumption, but I've never really been overweight. But it was, like so many other things in my life, an experiment, an experience. Anyway, with that being said, is just kind of a prelude. Recent injuries with myself, when I said in the last my last video that I moved my considerations against my diet, did not become primary. I wasn't trying to fulfill an ideology or reason. My notions of maintaining a vegetarian diet. I was a vegetarian before I crushed my feet, lost a lot of tendons and a lot of flesh, muscle, and so forth. And going into the hospital, they they immediately started feeding me a diet heavy in irons and supplements, plenty of supplements, and plenty of meat being served. And so I went ahead and consumed what they were giving. They said I was incredibly malnourished, incredibly anemic, and that they were going to remedy that. And I'm not certain many hospital. Trying to get an all vegetarian or vegan diet in a hospital, I think is the doctors vote that down when they see that's been ordered, or it's immediately negated. And this, of course, I'm making a generalization. I'm not saying that as a matter of fact. I'm not saying there's not doctors that aren't vegan. I just imagine that there's not too many. So let's see. As far as my particular discussion on things. First, I want to go over just some basic things in terms of words, rationality, sentience, right, do that which is right, or right-minded. I want to talk about suffering and slavery and rape in terms of comparative ethics, centrism, that locution around particular words, the adherence to words such as, well, we want to maintain rationality, so somebody becomes centric around the word rationality or around the word right or right-minded, or they become centric around the word sentience. And by centric, I mean they're utilizing a particular word or an idea as a maintenance in which to continue a dialogue or sprout the dialogue from these vantage points. I also want to speak about addiction, parry addiction with discipline, not allow the people putting forth argumentation for addiction as like a human primary default to go without being challenged to the word discipline as a counter idea. Cannibalism. I do want to continue to emphasize our delimiting of words, the demarcation lines that we maintain, demarcations between ideas, ideologues, what we call truth, what we call rational, reasonable, right, correct, so forth. These are important. I want to focus on uniformity. Uniformity in terms of agreement, in terms of common repetition, kind of a buddy system, butt hugging or bum fucking one another into kind of notions of community, notions of collaboration, groups, group efforts. The one formulates uniformity of ideas and maintenance of common reiteration and claims of common base. But so many things that I'm against, and so many things that I'm included in, revolve around, I guess, that are centrifugal around the idea of uniformity. Truth. I want to speak of the operatic, apodictic, demagoguery in terms of lying, whether or not putting forth lies as a demagoguery is, just necessarily a polemic or didactic approaches towards propaganda, trying to infiltrate ideas into other people's minds, but doing so as an antithesis to truth and making certain that that which is operatic, or the indeterminate outlines of truth, are not confused with demagoguery. I want to speak of policy and law structure, the enforcement of authoritarian ideas, law structure, that is the promulgating of a policy of forced uniformity, a little bit of history that comes in with that, normatives, traditions, habits that are inherited or that are performed, and then industries, livestock, medicine, oil industries, so forth. Those are kind of my layouts, what it is I want to go into. I guess I only have about 45 minutes to do so, or I'll just speed this video up. I don't mind myself sounding like a chickmunk. And actually, I don't mind it partially because I think that, if people just listen and just take in what's being said, even at a fast rate, they'll be able to digest it. If their preference is normal speed, then so be it. There's software that you can download online that will slow down videos or speed them up also. And I might be able to link that in the low bar. I've used it to speed up through videos because it's my preference to listen to people in chickmunk voices and just get through the information. And the tonal quality is important, of course, in certain respects. Okay, so let me go ahead and I'm going to make a claim, just an argumentative claim. First of all, Yeah, what I was doing in the last video, I made a statement that you know, plants, the gradation of the notion of sentience, you know, and I was trying to bring up the wiggle of a worm and the wiggle of a leech, and talk about the neurons of a gnat. An ant have brains, they have neurons. Um, you can take a needle and poke an ant and watch it wiggle. You could do the same thing with a gnat or even a fruit fly, very, very super tiny. And I'm wondering, as a question for Fred Conference Report or Gary, or whomever, it's a public forum, would like to speak about the level at which, you know, worms, I guess not really having eyes, but still wiggle and wriggle, and fruit flies that do have eyes wiggle and wriggle. Up and down the level, meaning what is included, how small does your animal have to become, or how does it have to be absent, um, what we'd say absent ears, absent eyes, like a worm, like a leech, and still remain, you know, still be considered feeling animals. I guess that's the root of the word sentient. We also want to so please answer that. At what level does one's delimiting, and you know, if you want to deny that you delimit or you make demarcation lines upon gradients, then I would you know, just call bullshit. There's obviously a demarcation that people, you know, that Gary wants to make between animals and plants in terms of sentience. So what, you know, when does a plant, or when does an animal, you know, on, I guess the word descending to bacteria, at what point do you stop, you know, do you draw a demarcation line and say it's okay to kill the bacteria, but it's not okay to kill the fruit fly? And then are you progressive at saving all of these animals that you see, you know, after a rainstorm? Are you out picking up worms to reduce suffering and putting them in grass, or back into dirt again? I mean, to what extent is one really saving suffering of animals in their environment? You know, when one falls back on the notion that, you know, like when one sees the industrialization of the slaughter of animals, does one, you know, well, what can I do? Well, I can stop doing this because I don't want to add to that, to the suffering. I don't want to add to the supply and demand aspect. And this would bring me into policy. This seems as if it would require a policy change, because the industrialization of meat as well as oil, the production, the ongoing slaughter, even if multiple individuals decide not to eat meat, the production of animals would go, you know, meat is thrown away quite often out of delis. It's handed out to food pantries. It's consumed by somebody. If it's not consumed by you, there's people who will overeat meat that are starving, that are given that. And so my criticism is that if one separates themselves from the consumption, it does not necessarily stop the supply and demand, or the supply aspect. Although they may think it does, I believe that the policy structure that's in place does not show that as viable. Now, I could be wrong. I mean, there is still, I mean, it's one entity, it's one more stock being purchased in Exxon, is adding to the value of Exxon. So in one respect, there is a valuation. So there is an argument: separate oneself, do whatever one can in terms of one's ideological placement within India industrial standards that are occurring. Okay, so yeah, and that kind of brings me, yeah, to policy and law. without, what else can one do? One could lobby aggressively to and or change the current law structures, how animals are treated. If one wants to make a gradient in terms of free-range animals and suggest that they're not much different than closely kept animals, then I would say that one has laying down a demarcation line or not laying down a demarcation line between the gradient between natural free range like Mustangs opposed to closed in a corral horses, domestication, just the idea of domestication of animals. Free range still means that they're owned, the animals are owned, they'll eventually go to slaughter, as opposed to raised in a barn, as opposed to raised in a pen, and as opposed to raised in one's own shit, blood, condition. The condition environment is one empathizes with, let's just say, major livestock. But if one wants to talk about science, the history of science on animals, there's a hypocrisy in terms of owing so much towards science and then realizing so much of what we know about science has been done based on experiments on animals, even if it's fruit flies, bacteria, to monkeys, to humans, so forth. It's all over the place. Okay, so one could go at suggesting, that on a gradient of hunting for one's meat, one could make a delimitation between that, delimit oneself, or make a line between, is hunting okay if it's for food but not for sport? Is it okay if, it's not okay at all? It's okay for both. People are drawing lines of consideration all over the place in terms of hunting, considering that vegetarianism, veganism is basically, 60 years old as far as an ideology. Even the science of knowing what a nutrient was, the history of the science of nutrients. Now that we know that, vegans still need B12, and there's arguments about whether or not they can get that strictly from vegetarian sources or completely from synthetic sources, or whether or not the majority of B12 supplements are still derived from animal products. I drink a protein drink, and it still is showing, milk product in it, and it's a protein shake that has multiple types of proteins in it, but it still utilizes milk. It still utilizes byproducts of animals to acquire that. Now, I'm just kind of skipping through topics here. Hopefully I'll be able to tie these together. The argument between, let's see. Yeah, so think of the history of, when the ideology of vegetarianism or veganism came into effect. It's all of a sudden, because we do have the capability of being vegan or vegetarianism, and kind of in our Occidental culture, we can lay down this idea. You compare that to Jainism. A lot of Jainists are vegetarian, and that's a historic religion that's been going for multiple centuries. And this, but it's still said that, the Jains still eat. They're not vegan proper. They don't lay down definitive lines, based on science and rationality. So even the idea of sentience is, it's about as old as a word as rationality and reasonability. It's only tracked back to 1300s, 1600s. So consider the etymology of when, it's like, oh, all of a sudden the notion of animal rights comes on, at the end of last century, maybe, if not even more recent than that. Right? Animal rights, the idea of sentience is a few centuries earlier, kind of like the Enlightenment, the notion of rationality. This whole argument, like a lot of it, if you argue with Gary, you'll notice he's Well, this is philosophy, and we're here to talk about things that are rational. Well, rational is rooted into reason, and reason is rooted into agreement. And this is what I meant, but there's a lot of butt humping going on here, trying to get people on the same playing field. It's an attempt at gathering uniformity of agreement, and calling this, maybe a teleology um, of civilization. We're becoming more civilized. We're reaching the civilized end, right? And so somebody puts forth, an argument that is that, well, plants are not feeling animals, but they're emotive creatures. And so I'll go ahead and drop a link to the tests in the 70s that I was referencing before in terms of, and feel free to look up and criticize these tests all that you like. But I'll drop it. It's The Secret of Life of Plants, polygraphs, electroencephalograms placed on plants, leaves. There's different scientific physical models that are used to represent. Um, I'm wary to use the term emotive qualities of plants, but I don't know. It appears that the statistical significance is present, and I couldn't find any counter data to what was going on. And maybe one would like to once again stick to the word rationality. Something that's 600 years old, and at the same time, want to say, well, this polygraph placed on shown in The Secret Life of Plants is bogus, and that was done 35 years ago, 30 years ago. And to say, well, we'd rather stick to the word rationality, that's 600 years old because it's traditional, but we're going to poo-poo on science that's just 30 years old, right? And so let's retest that. We might get that kind of argument coming out of people. But there is a gradient into plant life. There's not just this typographical type difference between cellular, whether or not it's cellular wall, lack of a nervous system. There's scientific evidences that are being shown that plants and the killing of plants are sensed but not felt sense. They make a distinction, a demarcation. I'll do that for the sake of argument between sense and felt sense. Between plants and animals. And so the idea of cannibalism still upholds that life consumes life. It appears that seems, unless you're a breatharian, and even that is a consumption, the idea that one can consume nutrients from the air that is self-sustaining. Right? It's an extreme that goes beyond fruitarianism. Right? But as far as the denial that plants, I'll deny that they're sentient. By definition, I'll deny that they feel, because so much of what we'll talk about in terms of pain is based on neurofeedback. But then once again, this would bring one's moral question to come into question about saving worms and the neurology of worms, the neurology of leeches. Bacteria don't seem to have nerves. They have reflexes. They have flagella. I don't know whether or not there's a nerve that defines those flagella. But this is what I meant by, in terms of a gradient. Basically, all I'm trying to do is say, notice everything in terms of gradient. Notice that it has a history of development, and notice how our minds tend to make demarcation lines in our thought patterns, right? And notice that there's this modern cultural drive to maintain rationality. There's this notion of science, but if the science moves against historic or inherited structures of rationality, people are often against that motion. They intuit against it, kind of like this notion that a vegetarian might go, well, God, if plants have this sense, and they don't want to project on it. They don't want to make words to identify what it is that they're seeing in terms of like any animalia thing, kind of like Lord of the Rings talking plants. They don't want to investigate that. They don't want to imagine that what they're doing is harmful to the plants, or that the plants have a sense reaction to dying or being blended up or turned into milkshakes or whatnot, or into smoothies. Then so be it. That's their demarcation. But my point is, notice demarcations. Notice how even the word rational and reasonable are etymologically and historically rooted into agreement. Notice how much people agree on things. They become uniform, lockstep, a monkey see, monkey do process, right? This is what I'm against. This is where I feel like I'm ostracized or self-ostracizing if I suggest that a lot of people that are going to maintain civil discourse, civil dialogues, and they're going to kind of like, Gary catches a lot of shit for swearing. His psychological approach towards argumentation, where other people would draw the line and say that's not civil, or they would say, what kind of psychological pain is being endured here? How many neurons are you firing negatively psychologically as opposed to physiologically? Right, so other people are drawing demarcations and delimitings throughout multiple gradients all the time. Now, some people like to throw out obscure ideas, right? And then they like to make, they'll throw out a word like right. That is right, or that is right-minded. I think this is really right-minded. So when you hear somebody say that's right, or, choose the right in terms of religious aspects, or that's right-minded, look at the history of the term right-minded, and how this is also, once again, an attempt at coalescing agreement, right? And right. I mean, agree with me, right? Because that's what I'm asking you to do, right? Is agree with me, right? Ding, ding, ding. That was my whole point, my whole shout out about notice the differences between personalities. I mean, if you take Cashify's video, he'll talk about aliens and balance and souls and so forth. I personally have an openness to everything that I'm hearing. I don't know where to make a delimitation that, meaning I'm not trying to maintain sanity any longer, right? A lot of people are just trying to maintain sanity, and I think that their considerations go to the point where they don't want to drive themselves into madness. And so you'll get conference report talking about moving into a fire where, oh, well, if you don't reflex away from that, you're going to cause these damages, which goes entirely in the face of coal walkers, people that walk on coals, or people that experiment with cutting themselves, or pain, or suicidal tendencies in general, fighting tendencies, war tendencies. Now, one level playing field, kind of like if you remember in Good Will Hunting, he gets into this nice logical debate, a comparative historical argument with another student about the history of agriculture through different levels of college education, right? But then he levels it all out to say, if you want to go outside and settle this, I'd be more than happy to do that. Meaning we can maybe everything's just words, right? Gary, I think, would like to assume otherwise. Like, oh, we're really going to come to this point. We're really going to agree on it, right? This is what I meant by schools of thought. Fish are uniform. They're in school. They're in tandem. They're in play. They're in movement, right? These are schools of thought. People are trying to adhere to this, right? This is camaraderie. This is nice. I'm not opposed to this. I like the idea of a public versus communal, but what I was driving at with this is kind of like the whole idea of a duel, or going into fighting. It's to say, look, we're going to have a disagreement ideologically, or we're going to have a disagreement, right? And really, the only ground that we can really share is the physical ground, for all things being square. Let's just take it outside and duke it out, right? Well, apparently none of us have tickets to go fly to the other one, and I have a little bit more repair mode, but that might not be a bad idea, right? As a matter of fact, I think I really admire certain Asian politics, because when there's a disagreement on the floor, they actually get into a fist fight about it. And there's something kind of neat about that, right? Now, this might be reduced to, oh, well, that's so uncivilized, that's so barbaric, yada, yada, yada. And there's arguments to be made there, too. I'm not opposed to that. I'm not opposed to anything, right? I'm just noting uniformity. I'm noting delimitation. I'm noticing how people are centrific around these particular words. And so there's, the word sentience is fairly new. Nutrients, supplements are fairly new. Veganism is a fairly new idea, and it's still framed differently in the West than it is in the East. There's different words for different considerations, different relationships in differing languages. And so to make translation, you have to combine words. You have to think of different nuances in order to get to these particular relationships. And that's just something to consider. And so this whole idea of animals and sentience, and how rooted is that care, not mythological. I want to go so far as to argue this, as I'm getting off of my topic, off of my little syllabus here, but that whatever decision you make, let's say concerning ethics and civilization, you are finding your mythological character, right? This is your character, but it's also your mythological character. You're the mind that's making the demarcations that delimit the characterizations that you're adhering to, right? That's what we are. Some people are cardinal characters, if you want to take an astrological vantage point and say, oh, they're cardinal. They're not really going to move their value systems very much. And then you get mutable signs that are going to be highly mutable. They're signs, they're delimiting markers that are going to move quite often. They're going to be dynamic and not very static. And so I'm witnessing personalities in terms of how static or how dynamic are they, and when they are dynamic, how are they dynamic? What are they moving into, right? I think that's really interesting, how people grow and how people change. Now, okay, as far as comparative ethics, animals like rape, okay. Rape normally happens to women. Molestation can happen to boys. Tons of time. There's a great Oprah on the molestation of men and how there's statistical significance in the amount of men that have been molested, both by women and by men, both in religious and in familial contexts. And I think that's really interesting. But what I was bringing that up for is kind of the idea, kind of like the Hitchhiker's Guide. There aren't too many animals that are asking, well, just take a little off the back. They're not asking for plastic surgery like humans, like, oh, remove that part of me and plug this other part in. They're really, they're not wanting to be eaten. They're obviously frightened upon the knowledge of something's going wrong. They might not be able to phrase it, but they can smell death, or they know death. Like the plants sense something's changing. They reflect this change in their environment. But so kind of this, if you were to go through surgery, you would probably want to be put out for it. Wittgenstein had some appendectomy type of surgery, and he stayed awake for it. Other people strive to endure lots of pain to relate to their notions of pain. Now, if you were to be raped, would you want to have a roofie, or would you want to be awake kicking and screaming through it, right? Kind of like with animals. If we are going to give them the best quality of life and then slaughter them, right? Or if you're going to watch a worm die in the rain, you know the worm's going to die. Would you rather watch it die in the rain and drowned, or do you more enjoy going out the next day and seeing the ones that are sunburned and flattened to the cement, right? Like which one do you prefer, right? So the whole idea is, do Do some people get off on the idea of being petrified, horrified? Yes. Uh, have I mean, have you seen an animal get really angry and then really happy about it? A dog? Have you seen, just different animals get upset and then not get upset, right? Old people in nursing homes dying, right? How are they coming to grips with it? Some of them are gnawing at their fingers, and other ones are calm, and other ones are docile, and other ones are crazed, right? It's like it's so different as one approaches death, one senses death or harm, right? So the same thing is like anesthesia would be more humane to, if we're going to kill animals, to gently seduce the animal we're going to kill away from the others, far enough away from the others, and then give them a putting them down thing, so their consciousness is removed, and then carry on from the slaughter from there. Or should we stick to the modern traditional 50 feet away from the herd, start lining them up, and to make certain that we get our, what is it, 660,000 tons of meat a day. We line them up, and the most common method of farming is to put the 22 bullet caliber machine to the head and slide a bar, roughly a half inch and 8 inches long, through the skull and out again, hence splitting the brain, causing the animal to drop, and then slaughtering it from there. And that's seems to be the general case for bovine slaughter, which is considered ethical within a certain demarcation line, or more ethical than hunting, or taking down a deer, a slow death where you shoot it and you're not even certain you hit a vital organ, so then you have to approach it and shoot it again, or slit its throat, or something to that effect. Different approaches towards animal death, towards the consumption. Now, so basically that's the argument. Should, in terms of policy, what else could someone do? Well, I think it would be good policy to see whether or not there is a chemical that we could use to put animals to sleep before slaughter, so they're not aware of their slaughter, as opposed to letting them endure those last few minutes being moved down in a line to be slaughtered one after another, where they can smell the death and so forth. These are different approaches if one says that humanity is going to maintain the slaughter of animals. So we get back to the argument of vegetarianism versus veganism, right? And I want to say, well, now we've bred all these cows that produce so much milk that if they did have a calf, the calf still wouldn't be able to consume all the milk there. And if we didn't have a machine sucking it out of that udder would literally pop and kill that animal. Like, the animal cannot live now. It's symbiotic to the industry of slaughter, right? So we would essentially have to let all those animals die and not reproduce them genetically or otherwise to end the industry itself, right? So this is my whole point, is that this is so built in to industry now that one person staying away from it, well, if you don't eat meat, that just means more meat is going to be thrown in the dumpster, right? Or it's going to be fed to somebody else, or it's going to be turned into dog food, right? It doesn't mean it's not going to be consumed or it's not going to be thrown out. It's just that you're not going to consume it, right? So this idea of what's right is appealed to. Well, so people maintain this ideology of lack of suffering, where then you get whole other philosophies that define life as suffering. So the attempted reduction of it only finds an equal balance when we reach the point of death, right? But other people, they are elated in their life, right? I guess, it's really weird to talk about, whether or not a pet is a happy pet, or whether a person is a happy person, depending on their treatment, their quality of life, their relationship, their zest, right? And then other people are depressed and down, and I imagine there's plenty of animals that are upset too. But Yeah, I mean, it's so weird to think of animal lands for it, you know, like animals. So the argument kind of goes, well, animals kill other animals like humans used to kill animals, right? But now not only can we facilitate a diet that doesn't require it, but that the moral high ground is is to not is not continue that, and then to convince humanity to not continue that tradition and to stop the laws and policies. Okay, the extension of that, thou shalt not kill, sort of stop ending suffering, if one can evidence that plants are suffering, then the teleology would have to include plants also, right? But only if you agree on that. This is the point. Some people are going to find this absurd, and that's fine. Their line in the sand where they conceive a line is like I said, it goes against their own interests. They would feel as if they were so irrational, outside of agreement in their own thoughts. So either they're so afraid to say something that's outside of possible agreement for themselves, even they would lose a sense of sanity. They would drive themselves off a cliff. So they reel it in, they tame it, they make certain that there's a traditional sense, there's a methodology behind it, you know, inherit the scientific method, if you will, negate things through that or not. It's interesting. Okay, so where do I want to go now? I don't know whether or not I've made particular sense. Addiction versus discipline. This idea, you know, Gary said, just admit it. You eat meat, you're addicted to it. Just admit you're wrong, opposite of right. You're wrong, but that you're addicted to it. Now, that's his justification for saying, I smoke and that's an addiction. I know it's wrong, but I still do it, right? As opposed to saying, I am not disciplined enough to stop eating meat. Or in Gary's case, I am not disciplined enough to stop smoking. I'm going to allow my biology to irrationally overwhelm my senses and claim that as my default position. So he continues to do that, and then he'll slide the word in next to cannibalism and next to we're a dumb DNA molecule and that reproduces, right? So he'll slide addiction in there as opposed to saying, well, this is a lack of discipline, right? Or this is a lack of circumstances. He'll slide that word in and try to make it this, you know, his notion of what the base root, the most filtered down components, the most atomic description of what it is to be a life, right? And base it on those components. Where I'm suggesting that this is showing an absence of discipline on his part, and plenty of other cultures have plenty of other discipline, and other ones don't, and they have entire allowance. It's not even in consideration to think about such things as addiction as even being something that one must concern themselves about, or to even put on the same playing field as what life is, right? They're just simply in disagreement with the base here. Yeah, once again, truth. Separation of operatic versus apodetic. The notion truth as something that is correct. You have mathematical truth, you have physical truth, you have biological truth. As you get further and further away from mathematical truths, or what we're going to call truths, and you get into physics, then they're more likely to be mutable truths, right? And as soon as you get into biology, before you know it, cholesterol causes X, Y, and Z. Eggs in your diet are bad for you, then they're good for you. You know, veganism is great for you, but then there's all these anemic people, you know, iodine deficient and anemic in some nutrient category for certain idealisms. And then you'll get the flip side, which is saying, no, they're more. These people are more of what humans are meant to be. Once again, this notion of meantness, this notion of falling into an ideology of what somebody is, what is correct, This is where I'm different. This is how I separate myself from the professor and from Gary, right? Where I align myself with Gary in certain components. Gary does not like where the Anton agenda is taking us. I'm simply against the notion of trying to delimit a line and form mental uniformity and put it under the guise, the promise of this is right-minded, this is correct, or and then meander through it. Uh, Anton's approach is operatic. It's not always going to point to truths. It's going to outline, more or less throw down ideas and relate them to facts, right? And I'm not opposed to that, but where I see his delimitation is that he's not open to madness and insanity and irrationality and symbolism and fleeting thoughts and ideas that go beyond the securities that he gets from, I'll say, his normative life pattern and the suggested reading list and what are considered civil covenants that are upheld by, and I just see that through his expression. Okay, I'm not certain what else to say. Let me see. Let me just kind of go over these notes here. Yep, humans have got for millions of years their B12 in some regions, the D vitamin, iodine, and calcium from meat-eating products and fish. The vegan movement is a 20th century movement created by Vegan Society around 1944. Claimed sources of B12 that have been shown to be inadequate or unreliable through direct studies of vegan include, let's see, larva or laver, seaweed, barley grass, the human intestinal bacteria, which is not reabsorbed, the human colonic bacteria, B12. It cannot be absorbed by the colon. Vitamin B12 supplements, in theory, should be avoided in people sensitive to allergic of cobalamin. Some people are incapable, if they're allergic to cobalamin, then they could not be a pure vegan because they could not take the supplement of B12 that would allow them to remain non-anemic. Claimed sources of B12 that have been shown through direct studies of vegans to be inadequate include human gut bacteria, spirulina, dry nori, barley grass, and most other seaweeds. Be careful where you get your information, because if you uphold it as if it's the case, then that means you're unifying with it, right? This is where it's like there's good science and there's bad science, but the internet almost floods so much trash out there that we don't know how to dissect it, what to align ourselves with, what to say is right-minded, what is sound, where we want to adhere to it. Okay, Secret Life of Plants, I'll put that in the bottom. Feel free to give a critique on that, yay or nay. Right-mindedness, rationality, 1600s. Look up this in your etymological dictionary. Look up the history of reasonability. These are, once again, centrifuge, gravitational pulls in which people are adhering to these words and reiterating these words, such as to overemphasize that that is where a discussion must go, should go, right? Discussions can go everywhere. The language is so much more open. So what I'm trying to impress is the freedoms that we have, but how our psychological adherences are indoctrinations. They're cultural indoctrinations. We speak differently than other generations. We speak different than other cultures. We speak different than other people. We adhere to different things. We have different delimitations. So language itself gives itself over to a structure. The structure is their basis for understanding rationality. The rationality seems to be embedded into normativity. History of enlightenment is around 1600. The history of the word sentience is around the same time. It used only sporadically Till the recent sin arguments for doing that which is right are different from arguments for that which is suffering. I want there to be a definite note when you listen to Gary between his arguments for that which is right, vegetarianism is right, versus vegetarian because it reduces suffering. Now, if he says that reducing suffering is right, then notice that combination. I'm not trying to make a critique against what he's saying. I'm outlining this, right? And some of it, I guess, goes against. I'm trying to make more robust the thoughts I'm having about these things. Yeah, I guess I've covered everything, really. Comparative ethics with rape, just consider whether or not you would want anesthesia. The notion of whether or not rape is right if you substitute words of eating meat with rape. You'll find that a comparative ethic, if you want to maintain the comparative ethic, you're going to run into a dilemma. I think most people will, that try to argue for omnivore or carnivores in terms of suffering arguments. Well, you could put in age of consent, you could put in rape, you could substitute slavery in there. Some people like to maintain a consistency in their argumentation, in their comparative ethics, where other people do not. The notion of trying to align comparative ethics is, once again, I believe, a uniformity of rationalization, and people can get caught in this idea. It was ironic to listen to Conference Report make this comparative ethics between slavery and civilization, and yet partake very heavily in justifying his inclusiveness in driving, right? The use of oil and transportation in what could be argued and has been argued as so ethically wrong against the planet, but to do so for one's own benefit. So there is this balance between one's own benefit relative to one's ideal about how the human is to function relative to these things. So Gary might jump in, well, that has nothing to do with suffering, so I don't want to bring it up. But once again, that's just noticing where people are interjecting and separating, where they're unifying, where they're parsing, and where they delimit their arguments. That's really the whole point of this, is to notice that the argument for omnivore or carnivore has to do with tradition. It has to do with an inheritance. It also has to do with kind of it's a newly emergent idea. The supplements do not necessarily make sense. I mean, if you could just take a glob of goo and never eat a plant again, and never eat an animal again, just every day you eat a glob of glue, right, or a gob of goo, and it fulfills you, that's, would you do it? Is that the most civilized thing to do? Therefore, you're not killing plants. If you support or draw a line where that makes any sense. Same thing, if it comes to a point where we are put a chip in and start reading each other's thoughts telepathically or through electronics, there might not be any need to open the mouth anymore. I mean, we have the technology to interject food into our system, just do streaming IVs. We could piss through catheters constantly. There's no need to get up. There's no need for any historic traditions. There are a lot of traditions we could strip away, but for some reason, the tradition of hunting and eating meat and how that's become negative seems to be under main criticism. And yeah, once again, I'll just say my particular instance, the doctors favored a protein diet. It was kind of put to me as in, you're going to eat and do what we tell you, or you're going to lose your foot, right? So I was under a little bit of a new paradigm than other people are often under. Yeah, gal. So there's more of the normativity. Thinking about normativity. I'm not even driving, and I feel like I just missed my my off ramp, right? So anyway, give me your feedback. Let me know what you think. I will go ahead and wrap this up because we're coming to that hour marker, and gall darn, I just don't want to have to speed it up and annoy anybody out there that doesn't want to sit through it. As if it's all about you guys. Anyway. Oh, yeah, since I have about 20 seconds. Yeah, where do you notice your delimitings on different gradients? Go ahead and, maybe write out five in terms of industry, in terms of animals, in terms of right and wrong, in terms of one's relationship to law and one's relationship to, yeah, sentience or something to that effect.